December 14, 1944. Camp Clarion, Pennsylvania. The transport trucks carrying German prisoners from the Ardennes Forest offensive ground to a halt outside the barbed wire gates. Gefreiter Klaus Zimmerman huddled in the back of the canvas-covered vehicle, his breath forming white clouds in the frozen air. His uniform was still caked with mud from the foxholes where American forces had overrun his position 3 weeks earlier. During the entire journey across the Atlantic, crammed in the hold of a Liberty ship, then the train ride through the American heartland, one thought had consumed him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is where it ends. The propaganda ministers in Berlin had been explicit about American prison camps. Prisoners froze to death in unheated barracks. Food consisted of scraps unfit for animals. Disease ran rampant. The Americans, they said, showed no mercy to captured Germans. Zimmerman had prepared himself for slow starvation in the bitter American winter. The truck's tailgate dropped open. Guards in heavy coats motioned for the prisoners to disembark. Zimmerman's legs were stiff from the cold and the hours of sitting. He stumbled as his boots hit the frozen ground. No rifle butts struck him. No dogs snarled at his heels. The guards simply pointed toward a processing building and told them to move in orderly fashion. Inside the building, warmth hit Zimmerman like a physical force. Radiators along the walls pumped heat into the space. Electric lights blazed overhead. American soldiers sat behind desks with typewriters and paperwork. One by one, prisoners moved through the line. Photographs, name and rank recorded. Medical inspection by a doctor who actually listened to their lungs and examined their frostbitten fingers with concern. Then something Zimmerman never expected. A guard handed him a tin cup. The liquid inside was dark brown, steaming, and smelled sweet. Hot chocolate. Rich, creamy hot chocolate with small white objects floating on top. Zimmerman stared at the cup as if it might be poisoned. The guard smiled and made a drinking motion. Zimmerman raised the cup to his lips. The warmth spread through his body. The sweetness exploded on his tongue. The soft white objects, he learned later they were called marshmallows, dissolved into sugary foam. He had not tasted chocolate in 2 years. He had not tasted sugar in 6 months. This was supposed to be a death camp. That first cup of hot chocolate shattered everything Klaus Zimmerman believed about his captivity. He stood in the processing center, holding the empty tin cup, trying to reconcile Nazi propaganda with the reality of American soldiers offering warm beverages to their enemies. Other prisoners around him wore the same expression of confusion. Some drank slowly, savoring every sip. Others gulped the chocolate down as if it might be taken away. One man, a young corporal from Stuttgart, began weeping, not from despair, but from the simple kindness of something warm and sweet after weeks of cold and hunger. The guards directed them to barracks after processing. Zimmerman expected unheated wooden shacks, dirt floors, and straw pallets. Instead, the barracks had concrete foundations, insulated walls, and rows of actual beds with mattresses, pillows, and wool blankets. 2 pot-bellied stoves at either end of the building radiated heat. Electric bulbs hung from the ceiling. Small lockers stood beside each bed for personal belongings. This was better than the barracks Zimmerman had occupied as a Wehrmacht soldier. That evening, the mess hall served dinner. Zimmerman joined the line of prisoners, expecting watery soup and stale bread. What he received on his metal tray defied comprehension. Pot roast with gravy, mashed potatoes with butter, carrots and green beans, fresh bread, and in a small bowl, apple cobbler with cinnamon. The portions were substantial. The food was hot. The quality exceeded anything Zimmerman had eaten since before the war. He sat at a long table with other new arrivals. They ate in stunned silence. A Feldwebel named Heinrich Weber, finally spoke. He had been a party member since 1938, a true believer in the cause. He looked at his empty tray and said quietly, "Either the Americans are the greatest fools in history, or we have been lied to about everything." That night, lying in an actual bed under warm blankets, Zimmerman struggled to process what was happening. The propaganda had promised death and suffering. Instead, he had received hot chocolate, a proper meal, and comfortable shelter. Sleep came easier than it had in months. The next morning brought more impossibilities. Breakfast included scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with jam and coffee. Real coffee with cream and sugar. After breakfast, an American officer addressed the new prisoners in competent German. He explained the camp rules. Prisoners would be treated according to Geneva Convention standards. They would receive 3 meals daily. Medical care would be provided. They could write letters home through the Red Cross. They could work for wages if they chose. They would have access to recreation and educational programs. Anyone attempting escape would be punished, but otherwise, they would be treated humanely. The officer then mentioned something that seemed particularly absurd. Every evening at 7 o'clock, the camp canteen opened. Prisoners could purchase items with their wages, or with money sent from home. The canteen sold cigarettes, toiletries, writing supplies, and various treats, including hot chocolate mix and marshmallows. Zimmerman spent his first full day exploring the camp within the permitted areas. The facility held approximately 4,000 prisoners from various campaigns. North Africa veterans, mingled with men captured in France and recent arrivals from the Ardennes. The atmosphere was surprisingly relaxed. Guards watched from towers, but did not patrol aggressively. Prisoners moved freely between barracks, the mess hall, the recreation yard, and other facilities. In the recreation yard, Zimmerman discovered something that completed his disorientation. A group of prisoners stood around a large bonfire. Not a cooking fire or a warming fire, but a social fire. Guards had provided the wood and matches. Prisoners gathered for warmth and conversation, some roasted marshmallows on sticks. The sweet smell drifted across the yard. An older prisoner, a Hauptmann named Friedrich Engelhardt, invited Zimmerman to join them. Engelhardt had been captured in Tunisia 18 months earlier. He had spent time in camps in North Africa and Arizona before transfer to Pennsylvania. He seemed comfortable, almost content. Engelhardt explained the marshmallow tradition. Americans loved roasting marshmallows over fires. It was a recreational activity, especially popular with children, but enjoyed by adults as well. The guards had introduced it to prisoners as a way to pass cold winter evenings. Now it was a regular occurrence. Prisoners gathered around the fire, roasted marshmallows, and talked about everything except the war. Zimmerman accepted a sharpened stick and a handful of marshmallows.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He had never done anything like this. The concept seemed frivolous, childish, but the fire was warm, and the company was pleasant. He held a marshmallow over the flames, watching it brown and puff. When it was done, he ate it. The exterior was crispy and slightly charred. The interior was molten and sweet. Combined with the memory of hot chocolate from the previous day, it created a sensory experience completely divorced from the reality of being a prisoner of war. That evening, Zimmerman attended the canteen for the first time. The facility resembled a small store. Shelves held various goods. Behind the counter, an American soldier and 2 German prisoners working as clerks took orders and exchanged money for merchandise. The prices were reasonable. A packet of hot chocolate mix with 4 servings cost 20 cents. A bag of marshmallows cost 15 cents. Cigarettes were 25 cents per pack. Candy bars, soap, razors, writing paper, all available at modest cost. Zimmerman had no money yet. He had not worked. But prisoners who did have funds moved through the canteen making purchases casually, as if they were in a civilian shop rather than a POW camp. The clerk, a friendly prisoner from Bremen, explained that most men worked. Labor details went out daily to local farms, forests, and factories. The work was not hard. The pay was adequate. Most prisoners earned enough to buy small luxuries and still save money. The American government held the savings and would pay it out upon repatriation. Zimmerman left the canteen without purchasing anything, but the image of prisoners buying hot chocolate and marshmallows lingered in his mind. This was not captivity as he understood it. This was something else entirely. Over the following weeks, Zimmerman settled into camp routine. He volunteered for a work detail cutting timber in nearby forests. The labor was physical but not brutal. Guards accompanied the detail but rarely interfered. The prisoners worked at a reasonable pace, took breaks when needed, and returned to camp each evening. The pay was 80 cents per day. After 2 weeks, Zimmerman had enough money to visit the canteen. He purchased hot chocolate mix, marshmallows, writing paper, and stamps. That evening, he prepared hot chocolate in the barracks, using the hot water dispenser the Americans had installed. He sat on his bed, sipping the sweet warm drink, and wrote his first letter home to his mother in Cologne. He told her he was alive, healthy, and well treated. He could not explain about the hot chocolate and marshmallows. She would not believe it. The evening bonfire gatherings became Zimmerman's favorite part of camp life. After dinner, as darkness fell and temperatures dropped, prisoners gathered around the fire in the recreation yard. The ritual was always the same. Someone started the fire. Guards provided fresh wood throughout the evening. Prisoners brought marshmallows from the canteen or from Red Cross packages. They roasted them slowly, comparing techniques and results. Some liked their marshmallows barely toasted. Others preferred them nearly burnt. Conversation flowed easily around the fire. Men discussed their lives before the war. They debated philosophy, politics, and religion. They argued about the best way to roast a marshmallow. They avoided discussing the war directly, though it was always present in the background. The fire gatherings were democratic in a way Zimmerman had never experienced in the Wehrmacht. Officers and enlisted men shared the same space without rigid hierarchy. A general from the Africa Corps might roast marshmallows beside a private conscripted 6 months earlier. Rank existed, but it mattered less here than in any military environment Zimmerman had known. One evening in January, an American guard joined the fire circle. Lieutenant Morrison was young, perhaps 25, with easy manners and decent German. He had grown up in Milwaukee, in a heavily German neighborhood. His grandparents had immigrated from Bavaria. He spoke the language fluently and understood the culture. Morrison had brought his own marshmallows. He showed the prisoners the American technique, golden brown on all sides, slightly crispy exterior, soft interior. Then the crucial step, place the roasted marshmallow between 2 graham crackers with a piece of chocolate. The heat melts the chocolate slightly. The combination of textures and flavors creates something called a s'more. The name comes from wanting some more after finishing one. The prisoners tried this American innovation. Zimmerman assembled his first s'more carefully. The graham cracker was new to him, slightly sweet and textured. The chocolate was milk chocolate, sweeter than German varieties. Combined with the marshmallow, it was almost overwhelmingly rich and absolutely delicious. The prisoners declared s'mores to be one of America's greatest inventions. Morrison laughed and said Americans had been making s'mores at campfires for decades. It was a tradition, something families did together. The fact that he was now teaching it to German prisoners of war in Pennsylvania seemed absurd, but here they were. This moment sitting around a fire, making s'mores with an American officer crystallized something for Zimmerman. The Americans were not his enemies in any personal sense. Morrison was a decent man doing his job. He bore no hatred toward the Germans. He had not experienced their military service as some great moral crusade, but rather as a duty to be fulfilled. Now that the fighting was over for these particular Germans, Morrison saw no reason for continued hostility. The war was impersonal for Americans in a way it had never been for Germans. The Nazi state had demanded ideological commitment, passionate belief in the cause, willingness to sacrifice everything for the Volk. American soldiers seemed to view military service more pragmatically. They fought because their country was at war, but they held no deep animosity toward individual German soldiers. This philosophical difference manifested in how they treated prisoners. Germans were enemies to be defeated, but once defeated, they were simply men who needed food, shelter, and humane treatment until the war ended. Oberkfreiter Martin Kessler arrived at Camp Clarion in February 1945 from a hospital ship. He had been wounded during the Battle of the Bulge, captured by American medics who had treated his wounds even as fighting continued around them. The medical care he received aboard the ship and then at the camp hospital exceeded anything available to German soldiers. American doctors had saved his leg. German field hospitals would have amputated. Kessler's first night in the regular camp barracks, still on crutches from his injury, Zimmerman brought him hot chocolate. The simple gesture, one prisoner helping another, represented how far Zimmerman had come from the frightened man who arrived expecting death. Kessler stared at the steaming cup with the same disbelief Zimmerman had felt 2 months earlier. He drank it slowly, tears running down his face. Not from pain, but from the cognitive dissonance of receiving kindness from the nation he had been taught to hate. Zimmerman sat with him and explained how the camp worked. The routines, the rules, the opportunities. He mentioned the bonfire gatherings and the marshmallow roasting. Kessler looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Prisoners roasted marshmallows with their guards. It was insane. Zimmerman agreed it was insane, but it was also real. This was what happened here. 3 nights later, Kessler hobbled out to the bonfire on his crutches. Zimmerman helped him find a comfortable spot near the heat. Another prisoner handed him a stick and marshmallows. Kessler roasted his first marshmallow awkwardly, nearly dropping it into the flames. When he ate it, he smiled. It was the first time Zimmerman had seen him smile since his arrival. The transformation was not universal or immediate. Some prisoners refused to participate in American recreational activities. They saw it as collaboration, as betrayal of the cause. These men kept to themselves, maintained rigid military discipline, and waited for Germany to win the war. They believed the current situation was temporary. German secret weapons would turn the tide. The Americans would be defeated. Those who had fraternized with the enemy would face consequences. But their numbers shrank as weeks turned to months. News from Europe grew worse. The Red Army pushed from the east. Allied forces crossed the Rhine. Germany was collapsing. The war was lost. Even the most dedicated Nazis could not deny reality forever. Many of the holdouts eventually joined the bonfire circles, drawn by the simple human need for warmth and companionship. They did not abandon their beliefs overnight, but they stopped enforcing ideological purity on others. The marshmallows helped. It was difficult to maintain rigid hatred while sharing something sweet around a fire. Feldwebel Otto Richter represented this gradual conversion. He had been a committed party member, an enthusiastic soldier, a believer in German superiority. His first month at Camp Clarion, he refused to participate in any American activities. He ate the food because he had no choice, but he criticized other prisoners who seemed to enjoy it. He particularly condemned the bonfire gatherings as shameful fraternization. But Richter was not a cruel man, just an indoctrinated one. Slowly, the daily reality of decent treatment wore down his certainty. The Americans did not behave like the monsters propaganda had described. They were professional, fair, and occasionally kind. When Richter developed a tooth abscess, the camp dentist treated it immediately. The procedure was painless thanks to Novocaine, a luxury German military dentists rarely had. The American dentist made conversation during the treatment, asking about Richter's hometown and family. Afterward, he gave Richter pain medication and instructions for care. The humanity of that interaction affected Richter more than any propaganda could. His enemy had treated his pain with skill and compassion. One February evening, Richter approached the bonfire circle hesitantly. Zimmerman saw him coming and understood what it cost the Feldwebel to cross that line. He made space beside him and offered marshmallows without comment. Richter accepted silently. He roasted his marshmallow with intense focus, as if the simple act required all his concentration. When he ate it, his expression remained neutral, but he stayed by the fire for 2 hours, listening to conversations, watching interactions between prisoners and guards. He returned the next night, and the next. Within a week, he was a regular presence. He never spoke about his change of heart, but everyone understood. The marshmallows had won where force would have failed. The camp library provided another avenue for transformation. Americans had stocked it with thousands of books in German, including many banned under Nazi rule. Prisoners could read Marx, Freud, Thomas Mann, and other authors condemned by the regime. The intellectual freedom was intoxicating for men who had lived under thought control. Zimmerman discovered American literature in translation. He read Mark Twain, Jack London, and John Steinbeck. The books portrayed America as complex, flawed, but fundamentally decent. The characters struggled with real problems. The society valued individual freedom and opportunity. These were not the decadent, weak Americans of propaganda. These were people building something new and vital, on cold days when outside work was impossible. Zimmerman spent hours in the library. He improved his English reading skills. He studied American history and government. He tried to understand how a nation so different from Germany could function, could wage war effectively, could treat enemies with such unexpected kindness. The answer seemed to lie in fundamental principles. Americans believed in individual worth regardless of background. They valued innovation and practicality over tradition and hierarchy. They were less interested in ideology than in what worked. This pragmatism extended to everything, including how they ran prison camps. Treating prisoners well simply worked better than treating them badly. Content prisoners caused fewer problems. Well-fed prisoners stayed healthier. Prisoners exposed to democratic values might become advocates for democracy in post-war Germany. The Americans were not being kind out of weakness, they were being strategic out of confidence. The Red Cross packages arrived monthly, sent from neutral countries, with goods donated by international relief organizations. Each prisoner received a standard package containing cigarettes, chocolate, canned meat, cheese, crackers, dried fruit, and coffee. These supplements to the already adequate camp diet turned meals into feasts. Prisoners traded items they did not want for items they preferred. A small economy developed. 1 bar of chocolate might be worth 2 packs of cigarettes to a non-smoker. A can of meat might trade for extra coffee. But the hot chocolate mix from the canteen remained the most valued commodity. Men hoarded it, traded for it, and savored it slowly. The psychological impact of something sweet and warm in the depth of winter was profound. It represented normalcy, comfort, and hope. On particularly cold nights, the barracks filled with the smell of hot chocolate as men prepared cups before sleep. The ritual became communal. Someone would heat water on the stove, others would contribute their chocolate mix. They would sit together, drinking and talking quietly. These moments of shared warmth and sweetness created bonds that transcended their circumstances. Zimmerman wrote regular letters home, though he never knew if they arrived. Mail service to Germany was disrupted by bombing and the advancing Soviet forces. His mother's responses, when they came, were heavily censored. She could not write freely about conditions in Cologne. But reading between the lines, Zimmerman understood the city was devastated. His family was hungry, cold, and frightened. Meanwhile, he was warm, well-fed, and safe. The guilt was crushing. He survived while his family suffered. He had 3 meals daily while his mother scrounged for scraps. He roasted marshmallows while his city burned. The contradiction was unbearable. Other prisoners shared this guilt. They knew their comfort came at the cost of their country's destruction. Some argued they should refuse American generosity, should suffer in solidarity with the homeland. But most recognized the futility of such gestures. Their suffering would not reduce suffering in Germany. Their refusal of food would not feed German children. The war was beyond their control. They could only endure and hope to return home when it ended. Lieutenant Morrison, the American officer who had introduced s'mores to the prisoners, became a regular presence at the bonfire gatherings. He spoke often with Zimmerman, whose English was improving rapidly. Morrison explained American perspectives on the war. From the American view, Germany had been the aggressor. Hitler had started the conflict. German forces had conquered most of Europe. The United States had entered reluctantly after Pearl Harbor. Americans fought to stop German and Japanese expansion, not out of hatred for German or Japanese people. This distinction between regime and population was foreign to Zimmerman. Nazi ideology had taught collective identity. The Volk were united in purpose. Enemies were condemned entirely, not just their leaders, but Americans seemed genuinely to separate the Nazi government from the German people. They believed most Germans were victims of the regime rather than enthusiastic supporters. This belief, whether accurate or not, shaped how they treated prisoners. They saw captured Germans as men who could be re-educated, who could help build a democratic Germany after the war. Morrison believed this sincerely. He said so explicitly, one evening while they roasted marshmallows. Germany would be rebuilt. Democracy would be established. Former soldiers like Zimmerman would be crucial to that process. They would return home with knowledge of how democracy functioned. They would advocate for freedom, rule of law, and human rights. The marshmallows they shared tonight were investments in Germany's future. Zimmerman found this reasoning both inspiring and presumptuous. America was confident it would win, confident it could reshape Germany, confident its system was superior. But the confidence was backed by overwhelming evidence. American industrial capacity had buried Germany in equipment and supplies. American logistics had moved millions of men across oceans. American innovation had produced weapons Germany could not match. And now, American generosity toward prisoners demonstrated a kind of strength Germany had never possessed. The ability to treat enemies well came from security in one's own power. As winter gave way to early spring, news from Europe became definitive. Germany was finished. The Rhine had been crossed. The Ruhr was encircled. Soviet forces approached Berlin. The war would end soon, certainly by summer. Prisoners faced the reality of return to a destroyed homeland. What would they find? Would their families have survived? Would there be anything left to rebuild? The uncertainty was agonizing. Zimmerman focused on the things he could control. He worked his timber detail diligently. He saved his wages. He improved his English. He read extensively. He attended the bonfire gatherings faithfully. The marshmallow roasting ritual had become central to his camp experience. It represented everything unexpected about his captivity. The sweetness, the warmth, the human connection, the quiet defiance of despair. In April, a new prisoner arrived who challenged the camp's atmosphere of relative peace. Hauptsturmführer Dieter Vogel was SS, a true believer who had fought to the last moment. Wounded and unconscious, he had been captured by American forces who provided medical care that saved his life. He arrived at Camp Clarion, bitter, angry, and defiant. Vogel denounced prisoners who cooperated with Americans as traitors. He organized resistance among hardline Nazis remaining in camp. He attempted to enforce party discipline. He particularly condemned the bonfire gatherings as shameful displays of weakness. Zimmerman encountered Vogel one evening as he headed to the fire. The SS officer blocked his path and demanded to know if he had no shame. German soldiers were dying while he roasted marshmallows with enemies. Zimmerman met his eyes and said quietly that German soldiers were dying because madmen had started a war. Germany could not win. The Americans had not created this situation. They were simply ending it. And while he waited for the war to end, he would accept what kindness was offered. Vogel looked murderous, but said nothing. Camp rules protected prisoners from violence by other prisoners. American guards enforced those rules strictly. Vogel could threaten but not act. The confrontation troubled Zimmerman nevertheless. Men like Vogel would return to Germany alongside men like him. They would compete to shape the country's future. Would Germany embrace democracy or retreat into authoritarianism? Would it learn from defeat or nurse grievances? The marshmallows and hot chocolate seemed trivial against such questions. Yet perhaps they were not trivial at all. Perhaps these small acts of humanity mattered more than grand ideologies. Perhaps treating people decently, sharing warmth and sweetness, acknowledging common humanity, even across the lines of war. Perhaps these simple things were the foundation of a better world. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The announcement came over the camp loudspeakers. The war in Europe was over. Prisoners gathered in the recreation yard, stunned. Some wept. Some stood silent. A few cheered, relieved the slaughter had ended. Most felt numb, unable to process the magnitude of defeat. That evening, American guards built the largest bonfire Zimmerman had seen. They invited all prisoners to gather. The camp commander addressed them in German. The war was over. Germany had been defeated, but defeat did not mean the end of the German people. Rebuilding would begin. Democracy would be established. Those who returned home would have crucial roles in creating new Germany. The commander then did something unexpected. He thanked the prisoners for their cooperation during captivity. He acknowledged that being a prisoner was difficult. Being far from home during such terrible times was painful. But the men at Camp Clarion had conducted themselves with dignity. They had worked honestly, followed rules and treated guards with respect. In return, they had been treated according to the highest standards. He hoped they would remember this treatment and would advocate for similar standards in the Germany they would help rebuild. Then the guards distributed marshmallows to everyone present. Hundreds of prisoners stood around the massive fire, roasting marshmallows on the night Germany surrendered. The symbolism was almost too obvious. Darkness, warmth, sweetness, community. Enemies sharing simple pleasures. The war ending not with recrimination but with something approaching reconciliation. Zimmerman stood beside Morrison, both men silently roasting marshmallows. He said he hoped Zimmerman would return to Germany and build something good. The world needed Germany to become a democracy, to rejoin the community of nations, to never again embrace the madness that had led to this war. Zimmerman nodded. He said he would try. What else could he do? Morrison clapped him on the shoulder and handed him the ingredients for a s'more. They assembled and ate them in companionable silence. The defeat of Germany, the end of the Nazi regime, and the beginning of an uncertain future, marked by chocolate, marshmallow, and graham crackers. The numbers behind Camp Clarion and facilities like it revealed deliberate American strategy. The United States operated 611 prisoner facilities across 46 states between 1943 and 1946. Over 400,000 German prisoners passed through these camps. The investment in their welfare was staggering by any measure. Each camp received monthly allocations specifically for comfort items. Camp Clarion's canteen budget alone was $38,000 annually. Hot chocolate mix, marshmallows, and similar treats accounted for 12% of canteen inventory by value. Prisoners consumed an average of 4 cups of hot chocolate weekly during winter months. The psychological impact of such small luxuries far exceeded their monetary cost. Medical statistics showed remarkable outcomes. Prisoner mortality rates in American camps averaged 0.4%, lower than the civilian population. Weight gain among prisoners averaged 18 pounds during the first 6 months of captivity. Dental and medical issues were treated promptly with medications and techniques unavailable to German military. The contrast with Soviet camps was absolute. Over 1 million German prisoners died in Soviet captivity from starvation, disease, and forced labor. Survivors returned broken and traumatized. American camps produced prisoners who were healthier upon release than upon capture. The recreation programs extended beyond bonfires and canteen privileges. Camp Clarion operated educational courses in English, mathematics, agriculture, and mechanical trades. Over 60% of prisoners enrolled in at least one course. The library circulated 8,000 books monthly. Theater productions, musical performances, and art classes occupied evenings and weekends. These programs cost the American government approximately $42 per prisoner annually, a sum that seemed extravagant during wartime. But military planners understood the investment's purpose. Educated, culturally exposed prisoners would return to Germany as potential advocates for democratic reform. The bonfire gatherings where marshmallows were roasted had become informal democracy lessons. Conversations around those fires exposed prisoners to American values through casual interaction rather than formal indoctrination. Lieutenant Morrison and officers like him were carefully selected. They spoke German, understood European culture, and could engage prisoners intellectually. Their mission was building relationships that would outlast captivity. The marshmallows and hot chocolate were tools in this effort, small gestures that created goodwill and opened minds. Surveys conducted before repatriation showed significant ideological shifts. 71% of returning prisoners rated American treatment as excellent. 58% expressed interest in democratic government for Germany. Only 14% maintained strong Nazi sympathies. The re-education through daily life had succeeded where propaganda would have failed. Klaus Zimmerman was repatriated in January 1946. He had spent 14 months at Camp Clarion, working in the forests, attending English classes, reading forbidden books, and roasting marshmallows at evening fires. He weighed 24 pounds more than at capture. His frostbite had healed. His English was fluent. His perspective on the world had fundamentally changed. The train journey back to Germany reversed his journey to America. But he was not the same man who had made that initial trip. He carried with him a duffel bag containing clothes, books, and a sealed tin of hot chocolate mix and marshmallows he had purchased with his final wages. He intended to share them with his family, if they had survived. Cologne was rubble. 90% of the city center had been destroyed by bombing. His family home was gone. But his mother and sister had survived, living in a basement apartment in the suburbs. They were thin, worn, marked by years of hardship. Zimmerman's arrival, healthy and well-fed, created immediate tension. He had lived comfortably, while they had suffered. The guilt he had felt throughout captivity intensified. That first evening he prepared hot chocolate, using water heated on a makeshift stove. He added the marshmallows carefully. His mother and sister stared at the cups as if they held impossible treasures. Neither had tasted chocolate in 3 years. Neither had seen marshmallows since before the war. They drank slowly, reverently. His mother wept, not from joy, but from the terrible contrast between her suffering and his relative comfort. Zimmerman tried to explain that his captivity had not been his choice, that his comfort did not diminish their suffering, that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make amends. His mother embraced him and said she was simply grateful he had survived. Over the following weeks, Zimmerman shared his experiences carefully. He described the camp, the work, the education programs, and the bonfire gatherings. He explained how Americans had treated prisoners with unexpected decency. He spoke about democracy, rule of law, and the possibility of building a new Germany based on these principles. His sister listened with interest. His mother remained skeptical. She had lost too much to trust anything new. But young people in the neighborhood gathered when word spread that Zimmerman had returned from American captivity. They wanted to hear about America, about democracy, about life beyond the ruins. Zimmerman found himself holding informal discussions in his mother's small apartment. He described how American camps had functioned, how rules had been enforced fairly, how cooperation had been valued over domination. He explained the bonfire gatherings and the simple act of sharing marshmallows with former enemies. These conversations multiplied across Germany as hundreds of thousands of prisoners returned. They carried similar stories of decent treatment, adequate food, and exposure to democratic values. They had seen alternatives to Nazi ideology. Many became active in rebuilding efforts, joining political parties, working in reconstruction, and advocating for democratic reforms. Zimmerman enrolled in teacher training at a program run by American occupation authorities. He studied English education and democratic civics. He was preparing to teach the next generation of Germans. His goal was ensuring they never again embraced the totalitarian madness that had destroyed their country. By 1948, Zimmerman was teaching in a rebuilt school in Cologne. His classes emphasized critical thinking, individual rights, and democratic participation. He organized student activities that promoted cooperation over competition, fairness over favoritism. On cold winter evenings, he sometimes brought hot chocolate to share with students. The gesture seemed small, but it represented everything he had learned: treating people with unexpected kindness, sharing warmth in difficult times, acknowledging common humanity across any divide. These simple acts built the foundation for better societies. The marshmallows and hot chocolate of Camp Clarion had accomplished what propaganda never could. They had demonstrated rather than declared American values. They had created positive associations with democracy through daily experience. They had transformed enemies into potential friends through the universal language of shared sweetness and warmth. Klaus Zimmerman stood at a bonfire during a school camping trip in 1952, teaching his students to roast marshmallows properly. The children laughed as they burned their first attempts. They competed to achieve perfect golden brown exteriors. They assembled s'mores using techniques Zimmerman had learned from Lieutenant Morrison 7 years earlier. One student asked where this tradition came from. Zimmerman explained it was American, learned during the war. The students pressed for details. Zimmerman described Camp Clarion, the evening gatherings, the unexpected kindness of enemies who became friends. He explained how something as simple as hot chocolate and marshmallows had changed his understanding of the world. The children listened with fascination. They had grown up in rubble, known only poverty and reconstruction. The idea that their teacher had once been fed and treated well by former enemies seemed miraculous. Zimmerman told them that Germany's future depended on remembering these lessons. Kindness was stronger than hatred. Cooperation achieved more than domination. Treating people with dignity, even enemies, created possibilities for peace. The marshmallow he had received on that frozen December evening in 1944 had taught him more about democracy than any speech ever could. Now he passed that lesson forward to the next generation, one student at a time, one marshmallow at a time, building the democratic Germany that America had envisioned around those prison camp bonfires. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.